Yes, we may readily acknowledge the drag shows have their place in theater, but that appeal does nothing to mask the odor of its immorality. If anything, it actually adds stink to the stench. Ferndale Fortitude, Volume 3, Number 1. Sure, drag is theater. Proponents of drag shows make the argument that they're performance art. The defense, as I've heard it in recent weeks, often includes an appeal to popular movies, and ultimately, always, Shakespearean plays where men played the role of women on stage. But with a little more knowledge of history, the advocates of drag shows could extend their examples well beyond Elizabethan England, to the Romans and the Greeks, to the very beginning of Western civilization. And there's no need to stop there either. Cross-dressing was prevalent in at least 1406 BC, for instance, when Moses penned Deuteronomy. A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 22:5. Far from a ridiculous prohibition against women wearing jeans or whatever dismissive straw man the professors at Cal Poly Humboldt present to their students when they're bashing the Bible, in this verse, God tells his people not to behave like the Canaanites, whose fertility worship was directed toward Astarta, that's Baal's twin sister, and often featured men masquerading as women and vice versa, and with links to homosexual behavior that's associated with Baal worship, though drag is clearly not something the triune God approves of. Let's be gracious to our LGBTQ neighbors and concede the point that drag is theater. Does this please you, neighbor? Wonderful. Now, regarding theater, Plato, Aristotle, and Seneca, all of them brilliant thinkers, had nothing but disdain for theater. Plato said, plays excite the passions, turn them into a wrong channel, and are, for this reason, hurtful to good morals. Aristotle wrote, attendance of plays ought to be forbidden to young folks. The permission of attending them is dangerous until maturity of age and education have established them in soberness, and until they have been rendered strong in virtue and shot-proof against temptation and debaucheries. It seems Aristotle was opposed to what we call transing the children. He adds, moral corruption was generally peculiar to the profession of actors, and Hollywood confirms this claim. Seneca said, one will seldom leave the theater without having grown more ambitious and voluptuous. The latter adjective speaks to sensual pleasure, if you didn't know, while the former's negative use conveys selfishness. Now, these men, and not one of them was Christian, lest I'm accused of appealing to my biases as a pastor, employ common sense alone to conclude that theater, which we grant includes drag shows, harms a healthy society, not to mention the children. 600 years before Christ, and 200 before Plato, the Athenian legislator Solon knew that the theater's particular threat to society was that plays represented in an interesting and entertaining way the deceptions of man, thereby encouraging audiences to practice the immoral behavior portrayed on stage. He asked Thespis, who introduced theater to Athens, if he was not ashamed of all the lying in the plays. And the father of the thespians, drag queens included, we readily acknowledge, replied, I'm merely lying for fun. And Solon answered, if we love such jest, the jest will turn into earnest. And this is exactly what has happened, isn't it? What once was tolerated, even celebrated as pretend, is now declared to be true. Where once a man in costume pretended to be a woman, in thespian language, for fun, now all of society is supposed to take seriously men who act like women. Anything less than earnest acceptance and approval of immoral behavior is today referred to as hate. So it is that theater corrupts nature. And as we acknowledge this, though not limited to local LGBTQ efforts to corrode Ferndale's morals through drag shows, it certainly includes it. But again, we're talking about theater in general, not one particular aspect of its debauchery. And sadly, the reasoning of the ancient sages was on full display at the Ferndale Repertory Theater's recent performance of The Elephant Man. I, to my shame, attended this performance at the first publicized showing. I encountered a gender outlaw when buying my ticket, a noteworthy example of the jest of the stage now being taken seriously out in the world. In fact, the only time during the evening when I wasn't exposed to a lie was when an actress forgot to act and exposed her breasts to the audience, thereby proving that the theater is no place for children or Christians. So yes, we may readily acknowledge the drag shows have their place in theater, but that appeal does nothing to mask the odor of its immorality. If anything, it actually adds stink to the stench. The question is whether we're honest enough to confront the threat to Ferndale's morals, or not. My words are no doubt ridiculed by non-Christian residents of our city. But what about you, Christian? Will you dismiss them? To quote the 3rd century African martyr, Cyprian, "To me it seems wholly incompatible with the majesty of God and the precepts of the gospel to permit the church to be defiled with anything like this. The law forbids men to wear women's garments, Deuteronomy 22:5, but how much worse is it not to put on women's garments only, but also to give expression to unseemly manners, and so instruct others therein. Thereby the young learn nothing good. Moreover, they're thoroughly spoiled." If you want to learn more about why Christ Church opposes drag shows and the corruption of good morals, well, I can be reached at stmarksferndale.com. I'd love to hear from you.